I'm John Graft, and I love Chicago real estate. Between showings, I stop in my favorite places, talk with local business owners, and bring their story to you. This is my Chicago.
In every corner, it's being smart about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's hard,
Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
because of my age and tenure doing this. I'm working with developers that are starting, people that are starting this path in their life. And so they rely on me for a lot of the insight and a lot of the value. Mm-hmm. But then when I work with someone who's way more experienced, my job completely changes. And it's just to the sales. It's really on the marketability. On that point, it's when you guys are creating these projects, do you ever involve with the branding, the setting up of what the building's going to be?
Yeah, we definitely are part of that conversation. Typically, it's a development team that either will do that in-house or hire someone, right, Andy?
We usually don't have, we could do some branding and that we've done, I think, a little bit here and there, but like even when you were saying with Fenton, you kind of did almost a marketing for him. I mean, more sophisticated developers already have a team in place, a marketing plan in place, advertising, all that. So we're kind of getting that information and kind of figuring out how that works with our building and our design too, and whether it's for sales centers or things like that too. We have to know some of that, I think, to see what their kind of vision is. But
okay.
That being said, I think that a lot of it comes from the ideas behind the building itself, right?
Because how do you make the marketing for the building before knowing what the building's
well,
going to
you
be?
name of the building. We talk about this.
Names are really hard, but I think it's often these conversations and brainstorming sessions that are like, what generated the aesthetics of this building, the architecture of this building, and it goes back to, it's the site context, or it's this view, or something, and it organically morphs into what the idea for the branding is, which is interesting.
That's how I've done it. Like the project I was talking about, I called it Holly. Mm-hmm. It's because it's near Hollywood Beach, and it falls in play.
Holly,
it
nice.
fits the demographic, and so everything in that building is coastal. So it's very bright.
Yeah,
it feels really open. Yeah. And I don't think we have a lot of that in Chicago.
We have a lot of that right on the other side of the lake. Yes. We do quite a bit of work, but not right in Chicago, right?
Yeah, and the stuff I do with Cedar Street, like the one we do, they always have a name for all their buildings too. And the Draper is the one we did on 5050 Broadway. It's based on Don Draper from Mad Men, because they did this sort of, I don't know, the interiors kind of reflect sort of that, the old mid-century sort of stuff and what they wanted to do. So that timeline is kind of why brought them to that sort of name as well, because that's the whole aesthetics that they wanted to have on the interior of the building too. So that kind of lent itself to the name. But some of it was a little kitschy, like Sono was South and North Avenue. South and North Sono. That's how it came up. Now we didn't come with that. That was their marketing crew with Smithfield used to do, but that was an interesting one. So
I think some people are really trying to get like Soho, right?
Yeah, that's where it was.
They're trying to replicate something like that. And only people that know Sono are the people that live there. Like no one's calling that neighborhood Sono or anything like that.
True.
When a firm comes to you, or a developer comes to you, or a client comes to you, on that vein, I think it's so interesting that you guys do single-family homes, you do things for universities, you do larger developments. Is that very common? I feel like
not for this scale of firm, it isn't. Right?
Yeah,
because we're about 25 people, and for that scale of firm, it's very rare. Typically you have a specialty, and I think it's our years of experience in Chicago and elsewhere in the country, 40 plus years that have allowed us to do that. Started doing a lot of single family. That's kind of roots of the firm, and then it has grown into doing all these other things and has continued to this day, right, Andy?
Yeah, and I think we joke around, but sometimes people ask us what types of work you do. We kind of go through and say we do everything except prisons and hospitals. And it's kind of true, because we have, and I personally have worked on a large range of project types, and that's also, I think, helps us with who we hire too, and those interested in our firm too, because there's that diversity of projects and experience, because it helps you grow as an architect, and everybody wants that. You don't want to be kind of stuck in sort of this single mode of churning out certain building types your whole career.
Interesting. I was wondering about that. So you definitely want to work on different things.
Well, you kind of do, just because you want to understand what you really like. I mean, it's something just like school. You go into colleges, you're not knowing what your major is, and you're kind of experiencing stuff. And I think architecture's like that too. So you have to go in and see what you are interested in. Until you get into it, you don't know sometimes. Working on a single family home is, with the clients themselves too, it's pretty specific, and it's dialed in more than maybe a large scale development. So I think that itself is a little different mindset. Those who you work with, consultants, clients, contractors, are all a little bit different. So sometimes it's your comfort zone, And sometimes it's just, the level of detail and the intimacy of, dealing with stuff that's so personal to people for single-family homes is a different mentality too. So
that's got to be completely different. So when someone approaches the firm, where does that process start? How does it look?
Well, I mean,
yeah, one point really quick just to finish on the last about single family, and then I'll answer that. I think that it's really cool because you think about like when you're in school and you go to like a French class and then you go to like an algebra class in the next period, like totally different. It requires your mind to kind of shift. And I think we're all better architects because we, in one given day, have to shift scales of, like Andy was saying, down to the detail of every material in a kitchen in a single-family home to a larger scale development. It makes us better designers, better architects, better thinkers. And I think that's really a valuable part about our firm that I really like.
Yeah, I think the process about that too, we look at both sort of scales, similar like how we go through the process is about the experience. And when we lay out units, I think that makes us a little bit better in a lot of firms of how we look at single families. So micro looking at that, but also then on multifamily, every single unit is important to us, how you experience, how you enter, what your views are. I think all those still are in play for both scales of projects.
And they complement each other. We'll learn something on a multifamily project about how to lay out something very efficient, and we'll bring that to a single family project. And the single family project will really dive into how people live, and we'll bring that then to a multifamily project, whether it be a condominium or a rental building. But I think we pride ourselves on furniture being able to fit in logical places and laying that out and thinking through all that, which unfortunately is not a given in Chicago market, in the market throughout the country. But we pride ourselves in that. It's really important that there's a space in a unit for a kitchen table, and there's a space, and it's intentional how someone will live there and how things lay out. So
I lived in Barcelona, and something that always stuck with me, because there's Gaudi there, and he would build furniture, and that was part of his mindset. And he had furniture that was made for men and women based on the body types. I thought that was really unique. But you're right, some places you walk into and you're like, who designed this? Like, I know an average couch is about 90 inches, right?
Right.
And so when I walk into a space, I'm like, this isn't going to work immediately.
Right.
Yeah, and
Like,
it's and oftentimes it's a design flaw, right? And,
well, I think that's the one part on like multifamily is a little tougher because you don't know your true client or true tenant yet, and everybody has different things they're after, whether it's small intimate spaces or large open spaces. So you have to, in those times, you have to kind of just see what the market is asking for, just like what your job is and what are people looking for, because we don't have all the data sometimes, even with big developers in our marketing crew and getting all the information on demographics. It's like understanding who your true client is, because the developer has a vision, but until you start selling them, renting them, you don't know the reaction, what you're going to get yet, other than just some feedback and some initial ideas and sales center things like that. They might comment on something and say, oh yeah, maybe if we do this and we have time to alter and change things for the project to benefit it, then that's great. But it's always about the information you get, and hopefully you're going down the right path based on the information you have at hand. I think is always a tough part on those bigger ones, because you don't really have a true user client that's going to be in that space. A developer is kind of overseeing 300 units, but does it really know what the end user really wants? Right?
It's a hope, right?
Well, it kind of is, I think. I mean, but I think we know enough, like your job too, what the market wants, and I think that's all we can really use at this point on those kind of projects, which is fine, but it's just a different mentality from that to university projects where you have a facilities group talking about every little piece of it, the faculty, down to the maintenance guy, to the head of the university and dean. And then on single family, it's the husband and wife or spouse or whatever kind of arrangement there is. There's always this, I want this, you want this, and you have to kind of bring everybody together. So it's a big social thing too, where you have to bring everybody together, get all the ideas from all of the clients, whether they're spouses, whether they're multifamily projects with multiple entities, and bring them together and try to have a cohesive idea. So
when you meet with a husband and wife, what does that interaction look like? So when someone engages with the firm, from day one, whether they start with the website or make a phone call into the firm, what happens after that?
Yeah, I think for single family, it's very different like than what Andy was describing, where it's a larger project. So innately, but it all leads to conversation, right? Conversation, questions. I think we pride ourselves in being intuitive and wanting to learn about the people we're talking to and what makes them tick. What do they want? What are their goals for the project? Rather than pushing an agenda that we have. So I think that's how it really starts at all those scales. And for single family in particular, it's simply just like, hey, what makes you guys tick? what do you want here? What is this supposed to be a project that is calming for you? Is it exciting for you? Is it just all about privacy for a couple people? Is it about bringing families together? You know, all those kind of questions that initially start to shape what they want in the project and what they want it to do for them.
Yeah, because we're kind of designing, I think, around a lifestyle, and I'm kind of understand the lifestyle based on goal boards, or, you know, we have sort of questionnaires we go through, and, you know, every person's different and what their wants are, and if they have kids, if they don't. So there's always a different story, and then you try to figure out what that lifestyle is and how you can adapt the spaces, the architecture to how this person or this family lives. And I think that's where I said between that and multifamily, it's a little different, because you get to at least get more knowledge and dialogue up front to help you start developing ideas for that, versus having bigger preconceived ideas based on, you know, a market condition.
Yeah, it's never like we have an initial conversation, then we just, hey, here's a sketch of a house for you that just pops out, right? It's like, there's, like Andy said, there's some rigor to it, where there's conversations, and then that gets documented and some questionnaires the client fills out, which then we go through and we make a graphic program, which is like, hey, here's all the spaces and relationships that you said were important to you, and here's an estimate of the square footage we're looking at, and then we have a conversation about that. Is the size kind of what you were thinking? That goes to the budget right away. It goes to the idea of the project, and that's all before we ever put pen to paper or build models and test houses on a site or projects on a site.
So it's interesting. Someone will come and describe what they want out of the home, and you'll from there figure out the square footage. Because I could see someone just be like, I want a 10,000 square foot home. And you're like, well, do you? Do you need it?
We get some of those too. And once they realize and you go into detail what it really feels like, and we've done, you know, in-place mock-ups, or even spatially here, excuse me.
Our office is next to a fire station, which is fun.
Hopefully it's not an emergency.
That's Chicago.
But we've done stuff even where we bring clients into the office and stripe out something with blue tape, like the painter's tape, and saying, this is what your closet, some of these larger homes have big sort of closets and, you know, experience it with bathrooms, and you're kind of getting an idea of the sense of scale. And to do that sometimes without even building, you have to understand that, because I think people think I need, you know, a 10,000 square foot house because this is what I've seen before, or, you know, this is what we think we need. And then you start looking at, is it really necessary or not? And I think we try to still be conscious and be stewards and not overbuild when you don't need to. I mean, from a use standpoint, from like, you know, energy standpoint, all those things that I think are important, to have people realize what you really need and what it would feel like. And sometimes those bigger homes are a little cold and harder to sort of lay out, and furniture, and sometimes
cold is real. Yeah. I sold this home in Barrington once. It was 12,000 square feet. The person who had it custom built spent $4.5 million doing it. I sold that home for $1.2 million. I started at 2.5. It took almost 2 years to sell. And the biggest feedback was like, why? What do I need with this space?
Yeah.
And it was a beautiful home. It was well executed, but it wasn't laid out right.
Well, I think we pride ourselves in thinking of, like Andy said, like stewards of the environment, making things efficient so that we can use less energy to heat and cool them, right? But also in terms of how someone lives, are there multiple functions to every space? Because oftentimes what happens is there's a difference. Like sometimes you'll have 15 to 20 people in a vacation home or a primary home for a holiday or for parties if someone likes to entertain. But oftentimes you'll have 2 to 4 to 6. And there's a big difference where we really attempt to allow a home to, through multiple uses, flex to that larger scale, but feel properly scaled and still kind of intimate at a smaller scale.
For the day-to-day, which again, you know, do you need all that space for, you know, 365 days a year, or is it really a few days? And
I can point out a couple projects that maybe tried to do that in different ways as we go around. I think there's different methods that we have a little bit of a toolkit for how to do that depending on the feedback we get from the clients.
That'll be great.
Yeah.
Speaking of energy, when your team works on a project, do you have people working on different parts of the home that are more specialized in something like energy or the facade versus the interiors? How does that process work?
Well, we have a team in the office that does a lot of research and finds tools for us, and is constantly trying to push the firm to report all of our projects and document what they're clocking in at from an energy use standpoint with energy models. But we really strive to not have just a team that you go to. Like, it's really about training the actual project architects that are designing, executing the project to do that work, because we think it's more valuable if that person is, while they're in the early stages of the process, testing the energy use and the solar orientation and the light glare. all at
so
once.
it's really
Yeah.
collaborative. We bring in everybody because it's nice to have a lot of voices, talk about different aspects of it, and then we kind of brainstorm, get together, think about big ideas, and then, like you said, there is a performance measure that we try to look at, and that's at the beginning of a project as well as years down the road after the project's done, because a lot of it is a follow-up. It's like, is this performing like we thought it would or should? And same with our consultants that we have on board, is like the mechanical system operating efficiently and what we did. So it's a lot of back check, and this is what I was mentioning before to you, like just a little bit sometimes is learning along the way too, lessons learned if something didn't work better or didn't work well on one project and how you can improve it, and those things. We're always trying to better ourselves, for the environment, for everything else, but also for our clients, because we feel if we can deliver something that's beautifully designed, great architecture, but also can perform really well, I think that's the best scenario in all cases, because you get that energy use standpoint, you get design, and it's comfort in both conditions, really, of how you feel in this space, but how it works too is really important to us. So I think we're great at design, but we're also great at the technical aspect of the architecture and detailing too, because that's really important to us to execute. You can have a big idea, but if it doesn't get executed the right way during construction, in the end, it's not the same. So
And we're always talking through that, learning lessons. I think that's fun, actually, to say, hey, this building actually performed really well. Let's dig into why, or this thing that we tried here is working great or isn't working great. What can we do better in the future? So that's fun for me. It's always trying to refine and do better and learn from past projects.
It sounds like there's an emphasis on going back to a project and learning what you did and how to replicate it somewhere else. Is that often to revisit something and say, okay, what could we have done better?
Yeah.
After someone's been living, after it's been functioning after a certain amount of time?
I think so. It goes back to having conversations with our clients after they occupy the project or rent it out in the case of a multifamily development and say, this unit actually sold really well or rented really well and this one didn't. And think about why and learning from that. And sometimes it's not always what we thought or intuitively.
Right.
A certain unit just was a hot cake and others weren't. And it's fun to go back and get that feedback, because then on the next project we have a reference point, and it may be different in different markets, and for single family homes, same thing, maybe some layout or some technical solution that we tried worked well or didn't, and learning from that so we have that body of knowledge is very, very helpful. It makes it fun too. It's like this constant attention to detail and technical execution that's very important to us, because I think we're a firm that doesn't want to just draw pretty pictures and cross our fingers that it gets executed. We are deeply invested in the execution of our projects and the detailing. It's funny, oftentimes you'll see a rendering, right? And then you'll go to the building and it'll kind of be a disappointment. I don't know if you've ever had this happen.
That's a real thing.
Yeah.
Especially on the interiors, but it's worse when it's on the exterior, because at least the exterior, I'm like, you can definitely get this right. I understand if something changes inside, but when it looks nothing like the original rendering, who dropped the ball or what happened?
Well, that's the thing, and I think that for us, I actually find our firm, it's the opposite, which is really cool. I oftentimes feel that our renderings, not that we do bad renderings, I think our renderings are very good, but that the execution that we put into it and all that effort, the way that a material turns the corner, and our attention to detail on the coloration of glass, our attention to detail on a whole host of things, yields a building that actually is better than the rendering or the expectation that we set when we simulated it. So that's what we strive to do, right?
I've walked to a few projects where you see the building, because all you've seen is on paper, on your screen before then, and you go and it's so magnanimous, it's so big, and it's impressive. And it really, it makes you want to come inside, right? It's so inviting. You're like, okay, next, let me see more.
Yeah. Well, that's part. I mean, we want to create places that people want to go to and spaces, and that's the, I think, exciting stuff for us, is we don't want it to be something that's just, a little important thing in a couple of years it'll be kind of unknown and not really recognized. We want it to be timeless. So I think a lot of that is to create something that is for, basically a destination for people, or, if it's a personal thing, they're just going to enjoy it every day. Because if you get a condo building or something like that, you want to go there and you want to, this is where I live, and you want to have some pride in that too. So I think that goes hand in hand with why we want to execute well. And I agree with him on the renderings. I mean, we really have a good eye of how we think materials are going to work early on already, and already understand what makes sense before we get too far. We want to make sure the rendering is representing at least the vision correctly to what we can truly execute, because that's what happens sometimes, is you have a vision and then budget comes into play, availability, you know, it's kind of pie in the sky. Or you're trying to think of big ideas, but if it can't be executed, it kind of falls apart. And then it's just a lackluster project in the end, which is unfortunate. Sometimes it does happen. So,
I think it goes to our staff, right? We're like most of our staff are licensed architects. They're passionate about design and concepts and ideas, but also passionate about how buildings get detailed and executed and working with contractors. And so I think that really is a testament to our staff that we have in the office and how well-rounded they are. And I think that's what really yields that, right?
And sometimes people may think, well, what we do sometimes is, doing a simple building is actually really hard. Sometimes you look and say, oh, that's really easy, very simple. It's balanced, it's proportioned well. But those are like the hardest ones sometimes to execute because it has to be so perfect that it is this clarity of like the scale and proportion that you want to show and the execution with the right contractor versus a lot of different things that happens on projects. They morph into all these things, and it may be something kitschy early on, but then the harder ones are the ones that are just really simplistic. And I think the appreciation of our clients is shown too, that they prefer that sometimes and appreciate the kind of the simplicity sometimes of how we do stuff. And that's what it goes down to, is like, can you execute this well? It doesn't have to be complicated to be complicated. It should be simple, and it's easier for us to design and for the client, but also easy for the contractors. We shouldn't complicate things. I think sometimes that happens too much in this industry. It gets they overthink it and it gets overbuilt, and it's not a great product in the end, I think.
Yeah, we're always thinking about how many conditions we have that are unique and trying to systemize that and make it as straightforward as possible, whether it's the layout of the house to how the materials come together in the details. So I think that's really important.
What's the architect and contractor relationship like? Because you can design the best building, the most beautiful thing, but ultimately someone has to execute that.
Yeah.
How often are you on site, and how are you making sure that happens?
I think it really depends on the projects, right? It's really different for every relationship. Some work we're doing, and especially with COVID, we had to do digitally for most of the projects, and they still are turning out great. I think it all comes down to visual communication and relationships, right? If you can show what the intent is through drawings or by having even a Zoom call lately, it just comes down to that. And we really do try to connect with great contractors that get what we're trying to do and have done that over the years. But yeah, it's different for every project.
I think we're well educated too on the technical side, like I mentioned too. So we understand it just like the contractor does. So we understand what can and can't be executed. Sometimes you rely a little bit too much on their knowledge base, but you want to push the envelope a little bit with a lot of the contractors as well, to push them to do better. And these days with trades and what's been going on with just workforce, it's a lack of it and a lot of expertise out there. So it's even more of an emphasis to barely be connected. And we have weekly meetings. You go out to site. You work through things, and we hopefully it's collaborative with our contractors too. That we talk about things, and if they have a better idea to execute, and we still get the same sort of design intent, then that's perfectly fine. And it's a collaborative effort, which I think is important, because to keep that relationship to the progress of the project is really important. Because if things go sour early on a project, it goes sour throughout the whole project, and it's really tough for everyone on board. So when you have a good team, a good owner, good developer, a good contractor, a good architect and consultants, those are the best projects. I mean, they don't always happen, but when you can, you try to, get that sort of output. And I think that's really the biggest part of that, is just communicating and open to ideas. And
that collaboration is key, right? That's what makes it fun, is when you have someone that's, hey, I'm really looking at what you're attempting to do here. Let me give you another idea. And then it turns into a great conversation of how do we execute this even better? And whether it's like a flashing detail on a window or a sill detail, something even that meticulous, right? Those are fun moments on a project when you can get that feedback from a trusted partner and help make it even better.
It must be difficult when there's a mismatch in the talent. For instance, if the developer wants to use a contractor that may not be the right contractor, and maybe you feel that early on, but then you're definitely experiencing it as it moves forward.
Oh yeah.
How do you handle those type of situations? I can see those smiles. You're like, yeah.
Every architect has probably gone through this. I think you always have that frustration, and you're going to be in there for the long haul. And I think that's where you have to, early on, you have to kind of have some boundaries, some rules, talk to them, make sure they understand you and you understand them and where they're coming from. And if there's opportunities for to help them out, if there is a contractor that's not great, and what we've done through our experiences, if we can teach them certain things that we've done, whether it's through other projects and other methods, that's great. But it does take a little more hand-holding sometimes, and we're not going to leave a project or not respond to certain issues that come up on a project. We're going to actually be diving in a little more, I think, and fee-based or not, or wherever we do, we want to execute the project in the end, and we're not going to walk away from something or have frustrations for our client in developing the project. So I think there we just have to get a little bit more involved sometimes, and it's okay. I mean, sometimes it's not the best thing for us financially, because it's hard to determine who your contractor is going to be on projects, because some can execute it really well and you have confidence in them, and there's less daily communication needed, which is the best scenario, because they understand you, and most of the time we've worked with them, they understand what we want, we understand how they execute, and that's the best thing, is always to keep that sort of relationship going. But for the new contractors, there is more communication needed, and it's just a balance that you have to do and still push the envelope, I think, to execute the project right.
When a project's designed, does then the developer go out and have it bid out to different contractors to determine who they're going to use? And are you involved in that process ever, the bidding?
Yeah, I'll let you take this one. I mean, it depends on the project, yes.
Most projects it's preferred, whether to scale, if it's a single family or a multifamily, to have a contractor on board early. And they do a lot of pre-construction services now, where they'll set up some initial budgeting and numbers for pro forma reasons, as well as kind of developing the project. So the closer we are to that and understanding what our design is and what they're pricing along the way, the better for the project, and not have surprises when it does go out to bid, because we prefer to have the information ready. And if we understand that we're going down a direction where it's going to exceed the square foot cost or the total cost, where we're heading into, we're into a zone where it's going to be more than 5% or we thought, that's when we step back, talk to our team, talk to the client, talk to the contractor, saying, okay, what can we do to stay on budget and on track here? And that's really important on all projects, is getting that understanding and confidence that this is still in the realm of our budget and not have any surprises. Because when you go beyond that and go to the traditional route of where you get sets out and you bid it out to multiple trades, you're not sure what you're going to get back, especially in this market now with increasing costs of labor, materials.
It has to be so
you have to do value engineering, and then value engineering is basically you're trying to take things out of the project, right? And a lot of times our clients don't want to change the program, don't want to change the area of the project, so we're left with materials and mechanical and all these other systems, and we can't really shave off too much on any of those things. You need to clad a building, you need to have insulation,
Right.
you need MEP distribution in your building, so that's the real difficult part. And those are the struggles sometimes because of costs, and we try to stay on track with that. And through our phases, we have a checklist system that we go through, and every phase should get pricing along the way as well. So we're comfortable with it, our clients are comfortable with it, and we don't have any surprises, hopefully, as we go forward in other phases.
Yeah, I think my favorite projects are where we have someone on early that's a member of the team that is at early meetings, that can give feedback on how we're doing something and how the constructability or costs relate to that. And it's not this like reactive thing later in the process, like Andy was saying, where you're trying to either cut money out of the project or revise something based on feedback that you're getting late in the game. So those are my favorite projects, when we have a team member that is on board. Then they're more invested because they know the project, right?
Yes.
They've been on from the beginning. There's relationships that have formed between the owners and the architects and the contractors then. So that's, in an ideal world, I would love to work that way on every project.
There's a selective process in the beginning. So we, if the client is not familiar with any of the contractors or hasn't worked on other projects, I mean, some are sophisticated enough where they've worked with, whether it's single family side or other contractors that they may recommend, and say they did our summer home or whatever, and we recommend them. That's the best, is just having a network of connections of who you've worked or the client has. So those are, I think, important. And then doing that on a bigger project, just bigger contractors we've worked with in the city on multifamily or whatever other typologies we're looking at, we suggest that we work well with these guys and kind of give our wish list, and then ultimately the client has to make a decision if they want to bring on. Now, there's no commitment necessarily that they're on board and they're pricing that they're going to get the project, which is good. I think sometimes people think once they're on pre-construction services, they're going to be in there for the long haul, which is not the case. I mean, they could still bid it out at the end, but having some oversight on all of the pricing along the way is just really helpful. And ultimately, most times than not, they'll get the project because they've been so involved, and they're assisting and providing free services in many cases to contractors to get that kind of information to the client early on, and I think that's appreciated, and in the end they're hopefully rewarded with the project if they're still on budget and are capable of doing the project.
Yeah, it's a win-win for everybody if that works out that way.
I know engineers are a big part of the process, especially as you're designing larger buildings. Is that something that's in-house, or is it contracted out?
We contract that out, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. We have, we do work all over the country, so oftentimes we'll be partnering with local engineers. We have a whole group of great talented people in this region in Chicago that we like to work with. So, and it depends. We don't always work with the same engineers. I think it depends on the project and what's the best fit or current workload at the time, which has been quite an issue lately because everybody's a little bit busy the last 2 years. So,
yeah, I think they have the expertise, and traditionally architects, way back before my time, did everything on projects. They were the structural engineer, they were the mechanical, electrical, plumbing. Yeah, and I think smaller scale projects like single family homes, there's a lot of that in Chicago where a 2-man, 3-man firm will do that because those are pretty specific, and after doing so many of them, you already understand the systems. Or there's design build that we do sometimes with certain small and big projects, so you're relying on sort of the expertise of the subcontractor. So there's minimal maybe input up front, but we still want to talk to them, not have surprises on what they're proposing for these systems, but it's a way sometimes financially to make things work where they're going to get the project to construct it, but they're also giving us input on the design of the mechanical and electrical plumbing. So there's 2 different avenues, but I think traditionally an architect used to do all this stuff, but I think because of liability, lawsuits, time, and then technology really too, it's like it's too much for one person to handle these days. So
well, it allows us to focus on what we really A, love doing, and B, what we bring the greatest value in, right? Which is the architecture itself. And then, we're integrally involved in all the coordination of those aspects of the building, because that's extremely important too, that there are issues that come up in construction where there's a miscoordination between a structural element and a mechanical duct that creates a soffit in a residential unit or something like that. We pride ourselves in properly coordinating our projects, and that's part of our checklist that Andy mentioned, is that quality assurance.
In our software, even what we use in our process for years now, we've been doing 3D BIM modeling, so everything's integrated. So, and including our consultants, and that's who we work with primarily. I mean, there's a few sometimes like landscape and civil engineers who are not there yet, but our mechanical and structural are who we hire for the same sort of software and technology to integrate, because the whole part of this is things get more complicated and the coordination gets more complicated. The integration of all these things are in one model now, where in the past, everything was 2-dimensional. 2D CAD drawings, overlays, you did it that way, but there was no 3-dimensionality to sort of the process, which helps us on the design side, but also on the coordination side of clashes and steel and mechanical and all those things. So you're trying to solve all those things before anything happens in the field, because that just saves time and money and headaches, and hopefully doesn't cause any changes either. So I think the technology that we use now with our softwares has improved so much now that we can really have an integrated system, which I think is just a positive for the project in general.
Yep.
What's BIM modeling?
Building information modeling. It's our tool that we use, Revit, is one of those. But it basically it's like a smartphone. You can think about it that way. It does all sorts of things. So does this model. And when you draw a wall, it has certain identifications there that tell it what kind of insulations it is in it, what materials are on it, and then with the interplay between structural and mechanical and other,
because all components are drawn 3-dimensionally, so it's this mass, but you think of it like any of these foam models where we walk around, it's looking at all 3-dimensionally, so you can slice and carve it any way you want.
So it's like having an X-ray view
basically
in every wall.
Correct. I mean, you could slice it and change it and shorten it and do all these things to it and manipulate it, but you can still have all the information in one place versus multiple overlays, is what it traditionally was about.
Yep.
Where is the divide between engineering and architecture? It's like where do those things separate?
Yeah, there's quite a zone that goes like this, but I think it goes to the actual engineering of the system, right? Meaning like.
Well, you say how do they integrate? Or
I mean, I think of architecture and I'm like, okay, you're designing something, and then when I think of an engineer, I'm like, the engineer is going to make sure it can be built, like it's possible, but I don't know if I'm right.
I think of it as it's integrated. It shouldn't be two separate things. It should be together. I mean, that's a part of the process. Now, again, the team is put together right at the infancy of a project. We start looking at concepts. We know enough about just general systems of what we're going to end up with, but we get our engineers and our consultants on it right away because we want them as part of the process because, you know, as we're going through developing ideas structurally, initially, most of it, and then mechanical as well. I mean, looking at sustainability things that we do for projects, having them on board of, you know, here's our site. Is there an opportunity here to do something with geothermal or solar or anything else? So I don't look at it as separate things. I look at it, it's most important to be integrated, especially early on, to not look at it as a sort of a separate entity. And I think that's why our relationships have to be strong with our consultants, because we see, you know, they see our vision and we see what they're doing. We understand, you know, through history, really, a lot of it is important because there's less hiccups along the way, I think, when you have some integrated team that's worked together in the past and executed great projects.
Like a couple simple examples, like we pride ourselves in never like coming to a structural engineer and saying we don't know where the columns go. We've like in a parking garage under a residential building. We've coordinated that with how we think based on asking questions. The walls will load down from above, and then we come and we bring that to them as a first start, and then we get feedback from that, and that's the process. And for like a home, if we want exposed structure, we draw through what size we want it to be and what we want it to look like, and then we talk through the engineering and get feedback from them on that. So it's a constant back and forth of, and oftentimes something will be too deep and you want something to be slimmer, and then you talk through how can we achieve this, and it's a balance between cost and sustainability and how to actually execute it. So I think that's really the divide, is like there's that gray area. The gray area for me is us sort of.
I think it's also left side, right side sort of brain stuff too.
Yeah,
so
right.
And actually we're pushing that too, so we're not trying to have the engineers be the sort of just focus on the nuts and bolts. We want to actually think outside the box a little bit too, especially early on in a project. Like, we know what you can do on a project based on what you've done on 10 other projects, but in this instance we're looking at you to push the envelope, whether it's structurally and doing something that's a little more, you know, atypical, I guess you could say, with traditional framing systems and cantilevers, or doing something mechanically that's innovative. So it's our job, I think, to push them, because I don't think their academic career or their careers now are kind of in the design sense of, like, you know, pushing design first. I think it's like the more technical aspect of it first, and the design is not maybe their initial focus.
That's how I think of it.
But I think it's trending a little bit more, and there's a lot of firms that kind of, you know, have in-house, like you were saying, if we don't, we don't. But some of the bigger firms have some in-house MEP, and even there, I could still see that happening there. Yeah. They're in the same building, they're in the same floor, but there's still two different thought processes for that, and I think it's really great if we can kind of push the design element with all our consultants, and so they can open up, because they have great ideas too, and I think it's just they're just focused sometimes on too much of the aspect of the technical and execution of, you know, as an engineer would be and should be, but I think just pushing the design is a little bit more of our goal for a lot of these consultants.
Yeah, but like anything, it's teamwork. It's facilitating dialogue and communication throughout the process and multiple steps, because they, you know, there may be a great idea that comes up that, hey, we're not always so rigid, like we can't change this at all. We sometimes want to have a great idea, adapt what we're doing, because it can make the project better, and we're all for that. That's what makes it fun. So I think that's the kind of collaboration and teamwork that I strive for. And when we get a great partner as an engineer or consultant, it makes the process just totally click, right?
Yeah, and we continue working with them, because it's a good relationship, and a lot of this is about just the communication. If it's easier to execute, it's easier to understand, and, you know, it just makes the process just so much smoother. So, do you actually do your own video tours, like for the condos or any sales you do, or you still hire other outsource for doing it?
No, we do it all in-house.
You do it in-house?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that way we can just get up and go and do it.
Yeah, because
there's a level of control that's nice there then.
What you want to show.
And it's the reason it's not the reason, but if I wanted to pay someone to do a video tour for me, it's like minimum $250, but it can get up to $650. And it's like, we need to do it for every property.
Yeah, you put the money into this, and you're like, how many of those did I get a rate of return on?
And it's like, just because I have a one-bedroom condo doesn't mean it should have a lower level of marketing.
Right.
I want the level of marketing to be the same if it's a $100,000 condo, if it's a $1 million home, or if it's a $4 million condo in the sky.
Right.
Like, the process might change a little bit because it's going to be more detailed, because there's more things to talk about. But just because you have a lower value home doesn't mean you should get a lower level of service.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that's real big in real estate. Is it's like, there's a lot of realtors that are still using like virtual tours that are photos with like some cheesy music in the background. It's like, why would you ever do that? And I think it's entertaining. Like, there's a lot to sell in a home if you know what it is. The flooring's a different material, walls are different things, plumbing fixtures are different. And even if you have an older home or a newer home or a home versus a condo, there's always something to talk about. And there's always something that someone might not think about unless you bring it up.
There's the bathroom. There's the bedroom.
Yeah,
you have to have a little more than that as a realtor to
your average
explain.
realtor, right? And I think a lot of homes all have something great about them. And I want to make sure that every person that ever looks at one of my properties, they watch the video beforehand so they can come and just see it for themselves. So I don't have to be this, I don't have to give the presentation. If they want me to, I will. But it's like, I always recommend, like, watch the video, come and see it, and that way we can talk about the things I discussed, and then you can be more of a question Q&A type thing and really showing it and feeling it out.
And hopefully more times than not, there's not many questions because then the video has done its job, so it actually goes into really detailed
That's
stuff.
what we learned during the pandemic. It was like people would walk into a property, they'd already watched the video, they'd seen, so we do a video, we do a 3D tour, and then we do high HD photography. So between those things, like, that's all
They
you
made
need
an
to
offer
do.
already and they probably didn't even walk in it. Right?
Yeah.
A lot of those, I could imagine.
And if you're walking in, you're trying to get that sort of gut feeling of
Yes.
what does the space feel like? I mean, that's what we strive for, right? When we design a project and we want people to walk in and say, "Oh my God, like, I want to keep coming back here," or "This is so exciting," and I can't even put words why, but it's right.
We were looking at VR. You're mentioning some other
Yeah.
technologies, but VR was something we looked at pre-pandemic even, and
Yeah.
we haven't dug into as much lately.
Well, it
but
doesn't sound great to people to put a mask that other people are wearing on their face.
Maybe
And
it's more
it seemed great in end of 2019. It doesn't seem so great now. But yeah, what's cool about that is it's the only tool I have experienced that when you have like a taller ceiling or a larger space actually calibrates to what you see in reality. Like, we know tools of how to check that proportions are going to feel good just from doing things for a while, but that's the only tool that really you have to look up and around and you get a sense of that. And then when you visit the project built, it's completely accurate, right?
Yeah, I think the most difficult thing sometimes with clients is to give them a visual of what it's going to be before it's built. And, you know, whether that's in the concept phase and even with the renderings, I mean, they're always zoomed out perspectives. You get a feel of material and stuff, but you don't get a sense of the space. And it's hard to, like, we're trained to sort of visualize and understand, like, I can explain something to him and not even draw and saying, this is what I was thinking, and we already know what it's going to feel like. But for, you know, even, you know, sophisticated or even unsophisticated clients, it's the first house they've ever built, they've never experienced that, there's no training for it, so it's like, we draw even a plan, they don't understand it, right? So it's like, how do you explain that? And then that's when we start looking at models or looking at VR or what other visual way can we communicate to them without it being traditional sort of two-dimensional drawings. So I think that's always something important to think about, is because they may say they understand and they don't. I think just we want to communicate enough so there's no surprises. And as we start building spaces, they walk through a house and it's like, oh, it's smaller than I thought it would be. And that's a lot of the case. Even us, when we do it, we're starting a project, we get out there, it's like, ooh, this feels a little bit smaller than we thought. So
Those
even
aren't good
for us,
words.
it's hard to kind of, you know, realize the space until you get in there. So
it's a lot of the tools you're describing. We actually try to, it's easier, I guess, when you have something built and you document it, that you can take a video or we actually try to facilitate the exact things you were saying through either virtual reality to actually get a sense of the scale and what it's like to look around in it, or just like a virtual tour. Just like you're describing for some of the real estate that you sell, we try to simulate that when it's simply just a rendering and there's nothing built yet.
And the other part is just going through projects we've completed. I mean, walkthroughs on completed projects, whether it's for developers or, I mean, not too much for single family because, I mean, they're all private, but even still, I mean, people understand or at least know our projects because either friends have them and that. So there's always the experience is the best thing. And if we can, you know, have people engage into the project we've done, that's the best sort of sell of what it feels like, I think.
For that Edgewater Beach project I was talking about, I'm doing this for the first time. We're going to do a video clip of walking through some of the spaces.
Oh, great.
It's $60 a second, the cost to make it. And it's like, I don't know if that sounds large or high for you, but it sounds
$60 a second.
A second.
What's calibrating that metric? Why
I have no
$60 a
idea.
second?
That's what they told me.
Well, what is the timelines that you're talking about, though? I mean, is it about?
So we're having the person that's creating the renderings is going to do basically a movie as if you were walking and moving through the renderings.
I see.
And for him to do that, it's going to be $60 a second.
I mean, we do that type of thing, maybe not to the refinement that he's talking about. I mean, it's really about how much quality you need, how much time, and how much money it takes to do it.
Yeah.
We do that quickly. We do little fly-throughs too, so you act like you're walking up the stairs, and you can move through our spaces with these programs we're using. So
is that easy to do?
It's $60 a second is probably spot on, actually, if you're thinking about it. It's easy to do if you have the design, but there's still quite a lot of work to get all the, if you're calibrating materials right and getting everything dialed into what the scale of a certain tile or stone would be, or carpet or millwork.
Everything will be exactly what it's going to be.
Right, so that's actually a lot of work.
Yes.
And have you seen visuals of that, like an end product?
It looks great.
It looks great.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
I was very surprised because the renderings it took me a long time to find a good rendering person, but the renderings, people think it's real.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, we oftentimes actually flex it all the way down to the other end, where we're like, early on in the process, we actually don't put any materials in, and everything's white. And it's intentional because we want people to focus on the proportions and the spaces, or oftentimes the views from a property, and make decisions based on bigger picture things than like the scale of a tile or something like that. And then later on we get into that, but we try like early on to make them as little as not as photorealistic as possible, and then slowly, in some cases, it helps to then add materials and do that later to look at the detail that we want to have help.
That sounds really smart, because if you're designing a home, you don't want to start with the finishes. You want to start with the space, right? Yep. And then you can build from there. So everything's just kind of whitewashed, I imagine, right?
Yeah, it's like exactly, and it just
it's like a white foam model. It's just very white and shades of gray.
That makes perfect sense.
If you get a little bit of shadowing, so you understand how light comes into the space, and I think that's important again about the visualization. Like, don't focus on this, because they're not used to kind of visualizing these spaces. So think about how you're going to operate the space, and then it could have 20 different options for finishes, or how we treat this, or how this stair looks. But I think the big picture is how you move through the space. We start big, and then we move in small. Like we're saying, the macro to micro is the biggest part to understand.
Finishes are always funny to me, because the space matters. Well, first, it's the location.
Yeah.
Then it's the space, and then it's your finishes. Yeah. Right? But people they always start with location, but then they go straight to finish. And I feel like some people think more about the cost of the materials in terms of I want this brand of this and this brand of that, and it can be so frustrating, because I see people throw away money all the time on brands that, like, you're not getting a better product. I understand you want this for this and that reason, but it's not adding to the home.
There's like kitchens and things like that. You
Absolutely.
typically see countertops,
cabinets, appliances, especially those two things, where there's such a premium on certain
appliances,
brands.
if they actually cook or not, right? They we entertain, and there's always these
red
high-end.
knobs. Gotta have the wolf.
Yeah, high-end appliances, and they cook once a week. But
if that.
Yeah, maybe that, not even that.
I helped someone design a home. I went in that home 5 years later. The oven was never used. The actual oven. They used the stovetop a little bit. The oven was never used for whatever reason. It's like, okay, interesting. But you had to have the wolf, right?
Yeah, the wolf, the Viking.
Well, what I'm thinking of as you say this is it's intimidating on any of these residential projects. How many decisions? Just the level of decisions.
It's bad.
It's completely overwhelming if you don't have someone helping guide you through what's important at any given time and when you need to make those decisions by. So that's something we really have a process that we, from the very beginning, like that's the whole point of the white renderings, is that you're not focusing on certain decisions that are probably they can be discussed, but they don't need to be made at that moment.
It's an evolution, I'd imagine.
It's an evolution,
because you don't want to talk about the stove when we haven't even decided what the kitchen feels like.
Exactly, and then you get into a whole process when it's the right time of what kind of style of stove do you want, and what do you want the countertops to be like, and there's multiple options. I think in general, I mentioned this before, but one thing that we love doing is at many scales, whether it's the first pen to paper on a project, or whether it's what's the design of the layout of the countertops in the kitchen, we do multiple options. So we'll test 2-3 things, because honestly, sometimes we'll have a gut feeling, but until we see it and talk about it as a team and look at it, we're not sure that's the best solution. And then when we go to a client to present it, we'll always show multiple options too, because it's important that they're an active agent in the process and a decision maker, and that's really important to us, that we're having that process, and it's organic and creative and collaborative. And oftentimes, right, the final solution is like a really interesting mix and match between a couple ideas that make it an even
Right.
stronger idea that we never thought of originally, and it's only because we had that conversation and collaboration that created that.
And hopefully that's what we get out of it, is
Yeah.
like our initial concept is here, and then what evolves into sort of the next level, the next phase is different, because there is a process then, and hopefully we've gone through that process and made it better, because you have a preconceived idea, or you go through initial ideas, and this is where you start, but as you discuss things, go through dialogue, develop sort of the process of communication and understand what the goals are again, it evolves, and I think that's an important part of it, is to evolve it positively to get what you want in their goals. And then the clients, they like being involved with it, and making decisions and being a part of the process, and it should, because it's their baby, it's their home, or it's the developer's property, and they should be vested in it too. I think that's a part of the process versus just a handoff, and I think hopefully that improves the project too, to have their input and they feel like they've been a part of the process, because I think that's the best thing, is that more communication and a part of the process versus being on the outside looking in. This is always important.
Yep.
There's in that same vein, there's this story, I forget what sculptor it is, but it might have been Michelangelo, but he's creating something, and the guy from down below is making comments on this and that. He says something, the nose is too big. And so as he's walking up, the sculptor grabs some dust, goes up there, lets some dust go from his hand, acts like he's chiseling it down, and then shows it to him again, brings him to a different angle, and he's like, "Oh, perfect! That's exactly how I wanted it." Right? It's kind of like
Smoke and mirrors, right?
Yeah, right. But it's very important that the client feels involved. Clients will come in at different stages of construction sometimes, and it's more difficult depending on the stage of construction for me. But I know what they want. They want a custom home for the price of a spec home, but they want to feel like they're making as many decisions as possible. But they also don't want to be overwhelmed in the level that you were just describing before that, because these decisions, when I'm creating a spec sheet for a new construction property, there's thousands of things.
Oh yeah.
It comes down from the towel rods to the tile on the floor to the size of the grout. There's so many different decisions to make, and a lot of people become very overwhelmed very quickly.
Yeah, some people love that and want to they have so much fun. I didn't have the time to do it then, to make all those decisions. It totally stresses some people out, and I get that. I mean, I've been through it, and it is stressful to have to make all those decisions. And I think that's one thing that we pride ourselves in helping, is to facilitate those decisions.
And I think those decisions,
Yeah.
sometimes you have to just start big, just understanding what you could afford. Those other things will happen. There could be different levels of finish that affect the price point in the end. But first of all, you want to make sure the program that you want can fit into this sort of site with this size building, with the basic bones that you need. And what is our structure going to be? How tall is this building? Start there, and then see if we're on the right track. Because if we're not even on the right track there's no point in looking at finishes anyway. We might have to do a one-story building because X, Y, and Z, or no basement, or all these other things that'll affect cost and things going forward. So I think being conscious of the budget and design along the way, and then those things can really change pricing and costs significantly in the end. So having sort of A level, B level, C level too, like you said, the 3 options, there may be 3 options for interiors too.
And I think it always comes back to, I think one thing that we like to do is always talk about the big idea throughout the whole process, even in construction, when we're trying to talk about how to adjust something. And when we're picking finishes, is what's the big idea of the home? If it's a natural home in a natural setting, let's use natural materials, and we're constantly talking about ideas like that. So I think that it's easy to get myopically focused on, I really like this material, and I like this material, and I like this fixture, but they're not all cohesively tied together. So I think we're almost like conducting an orchestra here and trying to make everything sing in harmony, right? That's part of being an architect.
Absolutely.
It goes back to your question about engineers. It goes back to your question
Interior
about
designers.
finishes and decisions, right? I mean, some of our other consultants that we typically use, sometimes we'll collaborate with interior designers. Sometimes we do the interiors on our own in terms of material selection. We have acoustic engineers, right? Each
lighting. There's all kinds of specifics.
Yep.
I mean, some of these people that do like large media rooms, and having specifics on acoustics is important. And in some cases, some projects maybe it's not as important, but lighting is very important. And again, like some of the uses may affect that, or what the client's profession is, or anything else. There's always some specifics that we'll have to go into that either we've dealt where we haven't, and there's always someone that's a specialty consultant that can work on that, which is good to have always, because you want to have the best person with the best knowledge to make decisions. And
well, it goes back to just teamwork, right? We're humble, like we know we love working with lighting designers because we don't know every lighting fixture, and it's constantly changing, and there's a lot of different ways to do things that could react to the concept of a project, and it's fun to have those conversations. And you know, for acoustics, same thing. Like, we don't know every detail of that. We know the fundamentals, but can we analyze a space if it's a music room so that it doesn't have reverberation and echo?
I met with an interior designer, and he was talking to me about the throws of lighting. And I learned what the throw was that day for the first, but I couldn't believe all the options. And just talking about recessed lighting and wafer lights and the different options of them, and how much space we're trying to light up, and
temperature of the lighting too.
Temperature,
is a big thing, is how you look at finishes, how you look at yourself, color, how you feel in the space. I mean, that's very important sometimes, because you don't want to have that cool hospital
What do you guys like a 27, 3000?
Well, 3000.
I like 3000.
I like
Some people
3000.
swear by 2700, and they
Yeah.
want a little bit more warmth.
Yeah.
It just
I'm a
depends,
3000
though.
guy, too.
Yeah, it depends on the project.
I
but
look
yeah.
better in that lighting anyways.
I think most people do.
Right.
Yeah.
Working with larger developers, what does that process look like from start to finish?
Well, personally, I work with some in town here, and we have a relationship. I mean, the first initial meeting, they're sophisticated enough. I think the bigger developers, at least most of them in the city that we've worked at, they have in-house staff and in marketing and finance, research, just looking at locations and surveying sites and things like that, where the dialogue starts with them bringing us information, where sometimes with a single family or something, they bring us some information, but we're going to probably provide more questions than that they're going to provide answers for. So I think on the developer side, at least the ones we prefer to work with, as far as somebody that's been through the process and understands it, they'll give us the information, and then from there we can be most efficient and get them what they need. We do feasibility studies for a lot of our clients, especially recently with our clients even out of state. So we're looking at prospective sites. They give us information. We start looking at feasibility studies to see if they even want to purchase the land. So I think that's where it's a little different. A lot of
What's a
developers.
feasibility study?
So feasibility studies, essentially, we're giving a site that the client is maybe going to purchase, and we're asked to look at what can be built on the site. So in most cases, they might have a program, or they might say, what can we build to maximize the use of the site? If they're multifamily, it's like, okay, how many units can we build there? These are the size units, average size units we want to have on there. And we have to do the research and zoning and site analysis and some code analysis initially to see what we can physically put on the site. And knowing, locally what you can do is important too, especially in a city of, there's a lot of overlays and going through the plan development process where you're allowed to do certain things that's as of right, and then there isn't as of right, where you can do different things based on things that have been built already in the city or certain new ordinances. So I think our purpose and process is really about getting that information, getting something on paper with multiple schemes like we do as well, and we present that to the client, where we'll have some general massing, some general floor plan configurations, different options, and showing what the site yields as far as its efficiency ratios, parking, unit count, how many units, or square footages as well, and then overall building height. And from there, they can use that to help develop their pro forma and try to see if they can even underwrite deals. So we can do those sometimes, it could be a few days. If they want more information, it could be a week or two, but they're really quick turnaround times where it's simple drawings, but it has enough information they can keep pursuing sort of the pro forma and seeing if they want to even purchase the property. Because there's no point in wasting all this time getting it to a point where I have a big concept and then they say, yeah, it doesn't make sense for us, but we spent X amount of dollars on your fee to get to this point, so you want quick decisions, and to do that you have to have information. And then we provide that information. They make a decision. If they feel like it's in a safe place as far as the underwriting, then we might go to the next level and say, okay, start looking at a concept now, and then we can maybe price this out while we're working on the underwriting and purchase.
They're gut checks, right? It's like, I have an idea for developing this property. I need a gut check, and I need an accurate one, because I may purchase the land based on the study, right?
Are they typically under contract when they come to you at this stage, or are they just eyeing it?
They're eyeing it a lot of times. They're not under contract in some cases, and I think that's the benefit of why would they come to us for a feasibility study. Like, they don't want to be under contract committed to an architect without even understanding if they're going to be in the running for the property if it even pencils out or not.
Or if there's something that's a red herring that they didn't realize that gets uncovered in the process, either
Right.
from an odd-shaped site that doesn't lay out great, which we often see, right? Some sites lay out amazing. Some sites are very difficult to work with, and that comes out. Or there's a zoning or building code constraint that can be challenging that oftentimes is overcomable, but you want to have that knowledge and be armed
There's
with that when you
setbacks,
go
there's,
Yeah.
certain districts where you can maybe do something or maybe you can't. There's a lot of stuff now with TOD, which is transit-oriented developments, where you have to see where you are. Are you in this zone or you're not in this zone? And there's always things changing with local ordinances too, so you have to be familiar with sort of that and what's happening on the developer side with planning department, because you always want to look for the benefit too for them. I mean, what are they planning to do with this property? Are they trying to maximize out? Not all of them do. I mean, some of them may do as of right, and that's perfectly fine. If they say they can put 60 units on this building and they don't have to go through the plan development process with the city, which could take 4, 5, 6 months, depending on their schedule, and there's always uncertainty going through that process of what you're going to get approved or not. Sometimes a safe bet is to go as of right, which is based on the current zoning, what you can build there, and we can give them that information, and then they say, well, we can't really make this deal pencil out because it's not enough density for what we need for the land price and other elements that it makes their decision making there. So we have to kind of give them that, and they tell us then of, okay, we might have to do this, guys, to make this work out based on these other elements in their process. So that's the best thing, is like the more savvy developers have that in there. We've gone through some projects where we had younger, newer developer, like you were mentioning earlier, where they're not really familiar with the process. It's a little more hand-holding, and we have to provide them more information, even ask the questions, have you looked at this and this, and some of them haven't. And I think that's a little bit more difficult, but hopefully we're educating them for whether it's that project or if they decide to do another site. So I think it's positive in the sense that hopefully we're teaching and they're learning, what we've learned based on these other experiences. So I think
a lot of developers don't get the credit that's due to them because they're often seen as the bad guy in a lot of situations. And people don't understand how many things they don't do before they choose to make a decision, before they finally move forward on that project, because they're just spending, they have staff, they have all different types of things they're looking at. And you have to wonder how many projects a developer looks at before they finally decide to build.
And oftentimes it's just data, right?
Yeah.
There's a little, it's kind of fun for us because it takes some of the subjectivity out of the process. It's about, for these feasibility studies that Andy's mentioning and walked through, it's like a big picture gut check, almost like an accurate napkin sketch, but you're trying to orchestrate an idea on the site with how the data all works. Can you make a typical floor layout more efficient by doing some methods that we try out, or because of the shape of the site? And that data is the difference between a deal penciling out or not oftentimes, and it's important. We pride ourselves on knowing that and constantly asking questions, and we're continually learning from our clients about what they're looking at and what the market's like, and it makes us better architects because then we can help them to at least study something to analyze that or to get to that goal, right?
And some of the locations, we're looking at different regions too, out west and other markets, and what we are familiar with here is not the same there, and that's us learning too.
Yeah, how do you do that?
Having one-to-one parking for every project,
Yeah.
and a lot more balconies, out west maybe than here, and understanding, and even the unit sizes too, from their model, what they typically do here to different markets, and maybe a little bit bigger square foot per unit. So it's those little subtleties that we're also learning, and it helps balance out too, because land costs are maybe different there, so there's different metric that they look at, and I think we are learning in the same process too, and understanding what's important to them. And sometimes it's sheer net square footage they can rent, but sometimes it's different things like parking is super important, and it's a lot of it's based on comps, just like what you do is like, what is our competition doing, and they're trying to improve on that. And I think some of the beneficial stuff that I've dealt with some of our developers too is I'm just thinking of what they do positive, and I think some of the stuff is kind of creating community. And you're talking about what the developer's goal is here. Sometimes it's not about money and just making money. It's like they hold on to these properties, and then they have their own leasing and everything else in-house and management, so they want to have a great project and what attracts tenants and keeps them there, whether that's through amenity packages or just their staffing and management and the way the building looks, how the spaces feel, but also like integrating stuff with community. A lot of our developers, and specifically Cedar Street I work with, they do a great job of kind of being a part of the community. They have, art displays and events within their buildings, and want the tenants to come out and integrate and have little write-ups and newsletters about the community that they're in, and working with, local commercial businesses as well. They have coffee shops in their lobbies, so it integrates the private and public together to activate the spaces, because sometimes in these developments, we have all these great amenity spaces, and sometimes they're not even being utilized. And especially lobbies, you go into a big empty lobby, and there's a couple of seating areas, and there's like one person waiting for an Uber, where they try to activate it and make it a more social thing. So I think that's important to look at with some. They're doing it well versus others. It's like there's other stuff on the agenda besides just making something profitable, but also developing sort of a connection with the community. So I think that's very important.
Cedar Street's a great example. You walk into their buildings and they don't feel like other buildings you've seen. And before this, I only found out you guys were working with Cedar Street maybe a week ago. I had no idea, but I was like, oh, it makes sense. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've been working there for many years already, like probably 10 at least.
Well, there's no building there's no unit I've ever walked in that was, because they do micro units, right? But none feel as good as those.
Well, we don't like calling them micro units. Actually, I think they're diverging from that.
Okay.
It's like a, I wouldn't say that they're trying to be a micro unit or anything. It was like, I think what they're offering.
Efficient? What's
efficiency?
Efficient.
Well, it's about having a space that makes sense, and affordability is a lot of it.
Yeah.
Being in different areas of the city and being able to afford something, and sometimes that means maybe the unit space is a little bit smaller, but what they make up there is the amenity size or what you can do to integrate. Like I was talking about, sort of the interaction between their tenants. So I think the trade-off is your rent will be less because maybe the unit's a little bit smaller than typical stuff comped in the area, but then you'll have this other element of the amenity package and the community feel, which kind of gives you space that you need as well for those other purposes. So I think it allows you to be flexible about where you move, saying, oh, I can't afford that area because the rents are too high, where I think they try to get into some pockets of the city and other regions now too, so trying to be affordable enough to give you what you need. And and their spaces are great still too, and it's not like
spaces are impressive.
If you're looking for something, a big range, and we're not like looking at new markets, we're not looking at just small studios anymore. They're evolving too. It's based on what the market is requiring and what people are asking for. So I think it's strategic in the sense of what is the demographics need and want in this area, and we're going to provide you that service and that product.
Well, it relies on the units being laid out smartly, and it goes back to each space having multiple functions in terms of how things are laid out. We actually lay furniture out a little bit differently in some of the units, and that's because when they set up a model unit, there's some thought behind that reacts to an original planning, and that's important because it allows the spaces to not be overly large, such that you can't use a certain corner of a living room, right? And
yeah, we try to make sure it's very efficient, and we've done enough of the unit layouts and understand we have a good formula and we work well with them, and I think that's what makes it great, is we kind of understand what their goals are and what we're trying to do, and that's been a good relationship that we continue to grow and work on. So
I thought their branding was spot on from day one. They were really good at creating this brand image here in Chicago, and then a very smart decision they made too was allowing all the users, all the residents, to use the different amenities in different buildings. And I'm not aware of any other company in Chicago that does that.
Right.
And that unique element, I think, tilts the scale for a lot of people to live in their buildings, because they're like, oh, well, I live in Uptown, but I'm going to be in River North tomorrow. Oh, I can use the gym.
The fitness center, exactly. That's some of it. There's
That's
a pool
huge.
at this location and not at this location, and that's a big selling point. Yeah, and they're all, within areas of the city which are really easy to commute to, and we try to look at sometimes with the transit-oriented sort of developments with them as well, because very bike friendly, and that's where they started off too. It's like, because they are some of the developments are larger in the sense of number of units, but it's also like trying to be conscious of where it's located at and accessibility to other parts of transportation in the city. So I think we're smart about that as well, if what the goals are. And so it's been really great, and we're continuing a few more projects in Uptown with them, finishing up now, and hopefully continue that growth over there.
I can't wait to see the Bridgeview Bank building. That's really cool. And then I just found out yesterday that is it the Draper on Broadway?
It's 50/50 Broadway.
Yeah. That one was a rehab. That wasn't even fully new construction.
Oh yeah, I worked on that project. So
that building looks brand new. I would never know that there was something there beforehand.
It was an old office building that we rehabbed and took it down to structure basically, but everything went down to structure. So that was actually 3 buildings. It was an old insurance building, and there was this rundown old exterior curtain wall cladding, and we stripped it down. And a lot of the stuff that they originally did too was repurposing buildings. I mean, they have a few in the city, the old Otis Elevator Company building, and the Salvation Army that we did called the Duncan. That was transformed too. So
that was a smart location for them. It was
yeah,
a really good play.
And it's about transforming, and they like that. I mean, the eclectic mix of kind of the old and the new, and that's some of their branding too. It's like they're trying to preserve things, and there's some new mixed in. So I think it's a good balance, and it's been successful for them.
You mentioned TOD. When I think of TOD, transit-oriented destination, right?
Well, transit-oriented development.
Development, sorry.
Yeah.
What makes it that?
It's just really the proximity to transportation, and a lot, there's ordinances out there that tell you your proximity to, whether it's CTA, Metra, bus lines now, which have been added, which were originally a part of that. So it's really trying to create a development that doesn't rely on automobile traffic, right? And it's really relying on more public transportation, and to do that, to avoid parking and other things like that, because you're saying we have these amenity elements of transportation available near our site. Hence, we don't think we need as much parking, because we're going to promote, and people hopefully will use more of the public transportation system, which is good environmentally and for other reasons of traffic and density as well. So that's a bonus, I think, in both cases for the developer, for the city as well. So those are really just focused on having the access in close proximity to these stations for transportation, versus being somewhere in the suburbs where you might have to drive, a mile away before you get to any transportation system, which is, again, about the environment and just traffic and everything else that goes with it. So I think it's a positive in that sense of trying to promote that sort of public use of transportation.
It also allows you to build some more efficiency units on the site, and potentially more units on the site, so you get a benefit from that if you're within those train and bus lines, which makes some sites pencil out.
And those types too, I think, is important, because those efficiency units or studio units, I mean, more times than not, maybe those are the people that don't have cars or don't want cars.
Right.
They're biking, they're walking to, or anything else. So I think when you get into bigger units and it's more family-oriented, 2-bedroom units and things like that, I think that's when you're looking probably to park more, or that's what the demand is. But if it's smaller efficiency units, I think it's more a different demographic sometimes of who's using it and what their goals are with transportation for the site.
I've always wondered, like before the pandemic, we were doing a lot of research, and we were doing this accessory dwelling unit research of the average square footage per person. Like there's all this data, it's a couple years old now, but in the United States that it's fairly high. And before the pandemic, I was like, it's not energy efficient or sustainable for each person to have that much space, whereas like 30, 40, 50 years ago, it was much less per person. People were just used to growing up, probably families were bigger, people were used to sharing bedrooms when they were growing up, and that's not the case always right now. And then COVID happened, and we're constantly talking about this in the office, because I thought one of the beautiful things about accessory dwelling units and these efficiency units that we're talking about is that it does provide an option in the city for someone to rent or purchase a unit that's a little bit more economical, and there's not just very large things on the market. And with COVID, it was interesting, because then there was a trend, and maybe it's equalizing now, but a trend that people wanted more space, because they weren't going to the office. They had a new puppy. They maybe started a family. All those kind of things. And I'm just very curious, and I'm curious to ask you also, like, do you see that trending in any direction, or is it still, for me, it's still a big question mark where we'll end up?
It's a great question, and it falls into so my wife grew up in high-rises until she was 14. I lived in a high-rise until I was in 2nd grade.
Interesting.
And I lived on a farm, and then I moved back to a high-rise that I've lived in since I was 24, and I'm 35 now.
Okay.
I prefer high-rise living. And now I live in a building with a lot of amenities and a lot of spaces. And for me, I'd rather have an efficient unit with just the space I need and use everything in the building.
Yeah.
I think just for cleaning, heating, cooling, just for those reasons alone, it makes more sense for me. And my wife's 5 months pregnant, as I was saying, and people are like, oh, so you're gonna move, you're gonna find out. I'm like, we're really trying to make this work. Like, we have a 2-bed, 2-bath. Her and I both don't need a separate office. I have my own office at a different location that I like going to, but also there's Zoom rooms in the building that I can use that are private and I think are very efficient. And for focus, like, I get in this little phone booth type thing and I work. it's very efficient for me, and I never thought I would like that as much as I do. I think, like, I work at my dining room table sometimes, and I have these very distracting views, and sometimes that's nice, but sometimes it's good.
I got to try a phone room. I've never tried one, actually.
They're good. You go to this little room,
Yeah.
and you look at your computer, and you get things done.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
are we going to be able to actually do it? It's
the
an
amenities in your
experiment.
building are the tipping point, right? If you
They
don't
are.
have those, you'd probably be looking for something else right now.
Yes,
right?
if I didn't have that, we would definitely need another bedroom. But
Yep.
we have 11-foot ceilings in our living space, and we have 13-foot ceilings in our bedrooms. We're under an amenity floor, so it's a unique layout.
Gotcha.
And so we're like, okay, well, we can do triple bunk beds, like if we have kids,
So
right?
do a little lofted
There you go,
area
there
or
you
something
go.
like that.
We can do something
Yeah.
like that, and I'm, because of what I do not think that renting is burning money. I think it's a very common misconception. People don't understand the cost of sale. In Cook County, you're going to spend 8 to 10% to sell your home,
Right.
and you have to be able to realize that somewhere else. And I think a lot of people would be better off investing in real estate in some form of multifamily, which there's syndicated sales. There's multiple ways to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a better investment than necessarily your home. But
Right.
that's just me, because I want to live in the center of Old Town, and I want to have access to everything. And if I'm looking at single family options, I'm priced out,
Yeah.
quite frankly.
Yeah.
And I don't want to spend $1 million for a home that's the size of my current apartment.
Right.
That doesn't make sense to me.
Right.
And so where it's going, I think people know they need their own space, but I think that I need my own space, like I have to have room upon room upon room,
Right.
is equalizing out. I think that was a really good term to use, because I think the pendulum swung, and the pendulum's starting to come back to the middle.
Yeah.
And I think people are being more realistic with the space they need. And
Right.
I mean, everything's dependent on what costs are and what's available. But I think that a very well located unit with a good view is
Right.
more valuable than a big house 30 minutes or an hour from here. And I think a lot of people feel that way. And I know people, I see both sides of it. I know people that moved to the suburbs and they're perfectly happy. It was the best move they ever made. I know people that moved to the suburbs and they're not happy about it. They lost everything. You know, now they have this one restaurant in their town and it's okay. And there's this other restaurant and it's a little better. And they can take their kids to the park and they have a backyard. But then when things cool down at night and they hire a nanny, they don't know where they're going and what they're doing. For me, I got healthier because my gym's there. I have no excuse to not work out, right? And then if I want to go grill, I have friends in the building. And it's like, okay, we can have dinner with a few people. And it's reduced the time of everything. We have
Yeah.
a bowling alley in our building.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, so what do you want to do tonight? Well, friends come to us. They bring the alcohol. They like, it doesn't cost us anything. Like, it's all
Yep.
built into our rent, right? My building was shot at this weekend.
Wow.
So no one can confirm, but I'm pretty confident the shooting came from within the unit. And they shot out 4 windows apparently.
Wow.
And so that's the clinch. That's the thing I don't have an answer for.
Yeah.
And as I was sitting in there, because I got a text from my friend who's always on Citizen app, and he's like 60 years old. He was like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "What?" He's like, "Your building, look." And sent me all the screenshots, right? So that woke me up. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, okay, so the baby's gonna be here, and what then? All right, that's the hard part. Okay, so accessory dwelling unit. When the ADU program came out, I thought it was the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
Was that popular in other places?
Yeah, there's a various amount of cities we had looked at because I was part of the ULI task force with another.
The what?
ULI task force.
What's
It's
that?
the Urban Land Institute, which
Okay.
is a great institution in Chicago. They essentially gathered architects, contractors, developers, and city officials. So folks from the zoning department and the building department to come together for a series of, I think, 5 or 6 workshops over the course of a few months. And the whole goal was to develop a report that could help to give guidance on the ordinance that would be written. So it was a rare opportunity and a very special opportunity to help shape that ordinance. So our team had a lot of fun with it, and we were looking at other cities such as Seattle has a great program, California, various San Francisco and LA, Austin, Texas. Many cities throughout the country have created programs where basically you can just have an extra unit on a single family lot that can be a rental or a place for an aging family member to live. And we then said, okay, specific to Chicago, we have tighter lots, right? A lot of these places have much larger lots.
How do our lots compare to other places in the country?
Sometimes they're about half of them, because a typical lot is 25 feet wide, right, by 125 feet long. So you might get double that in other states. And what you have then is you have more ability to not have any conflict between an accessory dwelling unit and parking. So for us, it really came down to, we have this amazing network of alleys in Chicago, which is part of our infrastructure. You don't see that in many other parts of the country. Mm-hmm. It's one reason I love Chicago over New York, right?
I mean, yeah, you can't,
yeah.
It's July.
Yeah.
You cannot go to New York right now at all.
Right, true.
It's terrible.
Yeah, so there's this incredible infrastructure set up that I think is really interesting when you're walking through alleys and all the different alleys in Chicago. So it started with the study of that. It started with the study of just pure density. How much of a percentage of your rear yard did you build on? What are the constraints of parking that we need to talk about to allow you? We were really aiming to have the ability to do like a coach house over garage or on-grade accessory dwelling units. So someone that has a mobility impairment and can't easily walk upstairs can actually get to their unit. And so that sort of shaped the recommendations for the ordinance. And then the ordinance came out, and it was not quite what everyone was hoping. I think it got tied up in some city bureaucracy, to say the least. So it got relegated to several pilot zones, and the parking was not quite what we were hoping for. Basically, if you have parking, you have to maintain it on site. So what that yields is, on any typical lot, you have to park above the garage. So they're not you have to park. You have to live above the garage and park below the garage. Yeah. It yielded the fact that you then have to live above the garage and go upstairs every day. I think it's still a great prototype because it's cold here, it snows, and people find a value in parking, especially covered parking. So we were so excited. We thought it was going to take off like wildflower, but I think that the limitation to certain zones of the city and the economics of it, if you think about it, right, it's hard to build a single-family house in this market right now. It's even actually harder to build a smaller house.
I've heard multiple people say that.
Yeah, if you think about it, you're hiring a contractor and you have no economy of scale, meaning that you're still building a pretty expensive kitchen and bathroom, and most of your house is exterior walls and roof. Right. So we've struggled, quite frankly, to get the economics to work out on some of the coach houses that we've looked into for some clients, because it's a really tricky economic situation.
And I was going to say, I think before you get into the other stuff, when he's talking about the economy of scale and the costs, I mean, this was similar to the modular housing sort of stuff that people were looking at, where some firms, I won't mention names, but some of them and contractors were looking at sort of the modular housing, but factory set up, prefab walls, all this stuff.
It's the greatest concept in the world.
It is, and then it's again like, but what can you deliver it for? Because the whole basis was like, okay, you can probably get a little bit of speed on there, but the costs were still high. Whether you're doing it in-house, and less on-site work is usually better and cheaper, in general. And then, but it's also like, there's still stuff that inspections have to happen and other logistics based on our current, code requirements in the city and inspectors and other cities as well. So it's like there's a little fine line, because you can get these prefabricated somewhere else, but who inspects them and how you bring them on site, and then the sheer cost, it's still coming out to the same or more than building a traditionally stick-built that you would do anyway. So,
and for anyone that doesn't know, a modular home is kind of like a 3D built home in a way, or it's built off-site.
Yeah, oftentimes in pieces, sometimes.
Pieces.
Yeah, floor system. You try to make it something that has a modular scale that can be repetition going on, and you can have some economy of scale because of that, because you're not trying to make 10 different conditions. You have some simplistic ideas on how you're going to construct it and the materials that you use. But with that efficiency, still there is cost, and the costs right now I think still won't balance out to make sense of it, because the whole reasoning I think is the speed and economics of why you would do it. The regularity of sort of some of the modules that you can repeat helps that. Now it may work out similar to that when you're looking at a big subdivision buildup or some that idea of like modular there, where maybe the initial one is pretty expensive, but you're building 50 of them and you're doing the same thing. That's like any other subdivision buildup. I guess that concept works then, but I think doing it individually on empty sites, that similar to the stuff that Mark was talking about, for those I think it's the same sort of issues, is about the economy of scale and how many you're doing and if you're doing multiple ones on a block versus one, it's a big difference, I think, in costs.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think for accessory dwelling units and for the modular housing, just to take a route, I think there has to be that economy of scale. So I think for the ordinance, the fact that it was limited to pilot zones kind of killed that in its footsteps.
I couldn't understand why the pilot zones were what they were.
Well, I think part of it was just which aldermen supported and really wanted the pilot zones, or who had residents that really were in favor of it. In the south and west sides where there were pilot zones, the thing that confused me was there was a limit per block, and I think the thinking there was maybe there was fear of gentrification or swath development, but I think that's poor-sighted, because that has killed A, the economy of scale, and B, I don't think a swath development for this would actually happen.
What's swath development?
The meaning that someone came and acquired a whole ton of empty lots right in a row and created development there. I think that was the fear, that it would rapidly gentrify an area and push residents that are living there out, which I get, but it's poor-sighted because now none are getting built in that area.
Yeah.
Because there's fear of, if I apply for a permit, I may not get on the list for the 2 that year and have to wait a year, and now I've hired an architect and contractor to help me apply for this permit, and I've lost a year of time. So
I didn't even know that was a case where there's a limited amount per block.
Yeah, only on the south and west sides. Thankfully, on the north.
And this, I think, is damaging to the whole idea of the affordability and affordable housing in the city. And we talked a little about it for multifamily, but on the single family side, the same sort of thing. I mean, you know, there are some coach houses existing in the city where that's still going on, where you can rent out the back, but, you know, the ADU stuff and how you do that, I mean, it would make sense that that's kind of going to help the whole idea of affordable housing, of, you know, economy of scale, and having smaller scale projects, right? You know, you want to have housing for everyone, but not everybody needs a 3,000 square foot house, right? Yeah. So it's kind of picking and choosing. I mean, some may, and some may be, you know, versions of an ADU where it's a larger, but it makes sense on certain lots for bigger families. So I think there could be flexibility built into all these, especially with all the available land we have, and it's not as a big undertaking because, you know, utilities are kind of on the side a little bit, and you have to feed a little bit. So I think there's a lot of logical things why it can work and help that scenario of the affordable housing, rather than looking at it from a, you know, a high-rise standpoint sometimes, or a multifamily, where I think a lot of the focus goes on sometimes with affordable housing, because they feel like the density is there and they can make it work somehow. Traditionally it has been like that, but I think looking at it differently as far as these other programs would be beneficial for the city to consider that as a part of the affordable housing sort of development.
When I heard about it, I thought it gave the greatest opportunity for exactly that, this small residence in the back for someone who doesn't need a lot of space but wants to be in a particular location, can have a lower rent, it can be right in someone's backyard, so that owner gets an income property, they have another revenue stream that they weren't going to have otherwise, or even better, an elderly person.
Yeah.
We have so many nursing homes being built, or assisted living, whatever you want to call it. My dad just moved into one. It's funny, like I'm in this apartment building, he's in one of these, and it's like the older version of what I'm in now, and it's very funny.
And they're facing each other in the street.
But you could have your parents live with you, they could have their own structure, and if it was all on one level, then they wouldn't have the mobility issues.
Yep. And I think that multi-generational living and that flexibility, that you could have so many family situations flexibly happen on one lot, but still have the privacy that you're not all under the same roof. That was attractive to me. We have I don't know if you've heard of them.
I love that concept, yeah.
Yeah, it's really powerful, and I think in the pandemic, when there was all of the infection happening in nursing homes, this was it seemed even more relevant, because people were pulling their parents out of places and bringing them home. So that flexibility would have been very nice. But I think in multiple family situations, think about having a child move back after college. They could rent the coach house from you for an affordable rate or something.
And they don't have to say they live in their parents' basement.
Exactly.
Like, no, I have my own place.
Exactly.
In the back.
Or it's a workshop or a work from home situation for someone for a couple years, and then you can rent it. We have a partner in Evanston called the Evanston Development Cooperative that I don't know if you've heard of them, but they're incredible. I suggest connecting with them. We should go out and tour some accessory dwelling units together that they're doing. But they actually were also part of writing the ordinance there and helping the city to develop their ordinance. And they have now recently built several of them. They're a design build, so they'll have an architect on their team. and they'll take the client through the whole process, all with one team. So the client isn't having to make all these decisions and hire separate consultants, and then they'll deliver that accessory dwelling unit. And they've used information to help them. They've mapped out every single property in Evanston that has the availability to do an ADU, and they've notified those residents, and they're just incredible. And I think if in the future, if this ordinance got promoted and expanded to the full city, I could see things actually being very fruitful for it.
I think a lot of people should have these.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense for so many different reasons.
And there's so many cool prefabricated units that are either in pieces put together or unfolding. I think there's a couple tricky things in Chicago that we have we have very strict building codes due to the dense lots for our fire separation and our wall ratings.
Is that the reason?
That's part of it, and that's why some of those off-the-shelf products can't easily be permitted here.
Okay.
We also have a difficulty craning things in, because if you think about it, if it's on an alley and there's power lines on the alley,
You don't have staging space or availability.
staging
Right,
space,
you can,
so
I mean,
it's really hard.
Yeah, it's about
So-
lifting stuff in as a prefab. I mean,
Yeah.
the affordability on those still,
Right.
whether it's stick build or prefab, is always the problem still about
Right.
material costs. And again, the size economy of scale, like a contractor is not going to give you a great deal on a small thing. I mean, it's like, it's not a garage.
He doesn't even want to do it.
Right, it's not going to be
Anytime you can do dozens of something, which I think if this ordinance got expanded citywide, you'd be able to do then it's better, and it's possible then.
Especially if you can
yeah.
go on the block and say, hey, we're doing this for your neighbor. If 2 people did it, we could do it at this cost. If 3 people did
Right.
it, we could do it like that.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and maybe there's a prototype that gets adapted slightly. That's something we've talked about
There's
a lot.
more familiarity with sort of the process, and that just helps speed stuff along. And once they get going on it and know the product and done a few, I mean, it's work for the city too, right? For contractors, for laborers, for subcontractors all across there. It's just more job opportunities, I think, too. And, at different scales. You don't have to be at a big contracting firm. It could be smaller,
It could be a real
scales
niche business.
Yeah.
I was in Austin and I stayed in one, and I was talking to the owner of the building, and he was saying how there's a company there and that's all they do.
Yeah.
All they do is ADUs, and they're busy.
That's
they're
great.
Very busy.
Yeah, that's exciting to hear.
Yeah, and that's what sparked my interest, because I wasn't really familiar with it until then. I mean,
Yeah.
I've seen second homes or coach houses or things like that, but I wasn't familiar with the ADU concept. And then shortly after Chicago passed that, and I'm like, where are they?
Yeah.
Where'd they go?
Yeah, we thought that would happen immediately. It was kind of depressing to see how little permits were issued.
I bet.
Yeah.
Booth Hansen has this Chicago affiliation, of course, but it has this, if someone's worked with Booth Hansen, they speak so highly of the firm. And that's how I wound up right here on this couch today, right? Why do you think that is?
Well, I think, we've been around since 1980. I've personally been here over 20 years. There's a reason I stay here. I mean, it's the people I work with, it's the process, it's the attention to detail, and our focus is about creating great projects, through all kinds of methods that we spoke about previously. I think it's like we want to provide, it's on our website even. I mean, the whole intent is to provide beautiful places that people treasure, right? So it's this longevity, it's timelessness, it's design, it's the types of projects we do. Everyone is different. So not only for ourselves, but for everyone outside of us that looks to us, I think we've always executed great projects. We continue to do so for over 40 years now. And I think that's, the size of our firm and what we can do we're nimble to kind of do small and big projects. I think that's a benefit for us and for our clients, just give them a little extra knowledge of all these different things we've worked on versus focusing on one thing. Because you can do one thing really well and keep doing it, but I think your exposure to other typologies and other experience helps you sort of think outside the box more on certain projects and what we do in our design process. So I think all those things culminate together makes us a little bit unique and special, and there's a reason I think that people like working here and people like working with us outside the firm.
I think it's the process too. All those things we talked about earlier. We make the process. We try to at least make the process fun, make it collaborative, and that's what helps to make the end goal really special for someone. That they have a space that they just are very excited about and fits all the goals that they had in mind from the early process. So
And we're passionate about what we do. I mean, we want to have a great
That's
project.
clear.
I want to be
That's
something
been
that I'm
clear
proud
sitting
of.
here,
I want our
yeah.
clients to be proud of it. I mean, the whole thing is just positivity. I mean, you want to have a great thing, not only to showcase for yourself, for your client, for the city, for everyone to use. And I think that's just the goals that we all should have. And if you don't have that enthusiasm anymore and that, then maybe it's time to think a little differently. But I think we all do, and the passion's there, and I think that's what keeps it driving.
When someone is interviewing your firm, are they often interviewing other firms, or people often coming and they want to work with Booth Hansen?
I think it depends. I think we get a bit of both, right? Some people, I think some people really want to do their homework and talk to multiple architects, and then they find that we're just a great fit. And some people just want to work with us from the beginning.
And we may not be a great fit for everyone, I think.
Right.
I mean, it depends what you're looking for. And, we do, I think, all kinds of things where we're either going to be conscious of what the goals are for this client versus another client. And if you're looking, hopefully you're looking to do something unique and design oriented is what we're a design first firm, and I think we want to keep doing that. And to do that, you have to have a certain client for it. So we're not going to probably be, the person who comes to say, hey, I want you to do this little strip mall over here, and we want to do it for the cheapest amount possible or whatever. We'll look and say, well, we can do better than others, I think, and that's what we always try to do. If we have some clients coming up to us expecting us to be competitive with other architects, whether it's through fees or whether it's through what service they offer, or just to get permits in hand, that's not us probably, but we can say what our value add is really, because what we're going to do is give you a different experience, and we're going to walk you through a process where the end product is going to be different than you expect, and hopefully it's positive for you too. So I think that's what we try to sell ourselves, because we're selling ourselves as people in our service, and that's the only way we can differentiate ourselves with others. And I think what we add and give versus other firms is a value add, and hopefully people can see that and we can show them that.
Yeah, I think it's that value that we bring. We push our clients, and I think a client that we can push and try to constantly elevate what they're doing, and they do the same to us, but we want to elevate what they're doing to bring value to it. That's the perfect fit of a client. So, oftentimes that comes clear in initial conversations, like if there's a synonymous relationship, and that can create a great project then if there is.
This was so much fun.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your time. This is a lot.
Cool.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah.
It's done?
Yeah, thanks, John.
I appreciate it.